Regent Street pulsed with its usual energy on a May afternoon. Luxury cars shared the asphalt with crowded buses, while hurried pedestrians walked along the wide sidewalks. Amidst the organized chaos, at the red light at the corner with Oxford Street, a black Porsche Cayenne waited impatiently. Inside the vehicle, isolated from the external world by tinted windows and air conditioning, Augustus Taylor observed the city with a distant gaze. At 72, Augustus was the symbol of British entrepreneurial success. Founder of Taylor Developments, he controlled an empire valued at over £2 billion. His name appeared on business magazine lists. His ventures shaped the London skyline, and his fortune grew even during crises. But that afternoon, not even the power he had accumulated for decades could appease the storm in his mind. Advanced pancreatic adenocarcinoma, 6 months at most. The doctor's words, spoken 3 days earlier in the Park Lane office, echoed incessantly. Augustus adjusted the knot of his Italian tie, an automatic gesture of someone who had always maintained absolute control. How ironic, he thought, that decades of building an empire succumbed to microscopic cells now multiplying in his body. The businessman observed his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face, still firm despite his age, bore the marks of someone who never had time to smile. Meticulously trimmed grey hair, piercing blue eyes, a heritage from his Portuguese grandparents, and an expression that had intimidated partners, competitors, and employees for over 4 decades. No heirs, he murmured to himself. He had never married. Relationships always seemed like unnecessary distractions for someone obsessed with the next deal, the next acquisition. Distant cousins in Portugal, a few great nieces and nephews he barely knew, no one with whom he shared any significant bond. His only legacy would be cold concrete buildings scattered across the metropolis. The light remained red, indifferent to his impatience. Augustus drummed his fingers on the leather steering wheel when he noticed a movement out of the corner of his eye. A fair small figure approached the stopped cars, carrying something in her hands. Another beggar, he thought with the automatic disinterest of someone who inhabited a city marked by inequality. But it was not a common beggar. It was a girl, frail, and with curly hair tied in a makeshift ponytail. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She wore a public school uniform, worn but clean, and carried a time-worn ukulele in her small hands. Without direct approach or signs asking for help, the girl simply positioned herself near the traffic light and began to play. The first chords went unnoticed by Augustus, who remained immersed in his dark thoughts. However, little by little, a familiar melody penetrated the car's sound barrier. It was Little Country Train by Villa-Lobos, a piece Augustus secretly listened to in the rare moments he allowed himself any vulnerability. How did that street child know such a composition? And more surprisingly, how could she perform it with such sensitivity on that small instrument? The girl's fingers danced across the ukulele's fretboard with impressive precision. It wasn't the clumsy performance of someone who had learned a few chords on the street. It was the execution of someone with a genuine understanding of the score. The expression on her face revealed absolute concentration. Her eyes closed as her fingers recreated the movement of the train through the Brazilian landscapes that Villa-Lobos had immortalized. Something inexplicable happened inside Augustus's chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades, pure emotion without calculations. Without realizing it, he lowered the car window, allowing the music to enter completely. The girl opened her eyes as she noticed the movement. She looked directly at Augustus without intimidation, just with the natural curiosity of childhood. She continued playing, now with a small smile on her lips. "How do you know that music?" Augustus asked, surprising himself with the initiative. The girl finished the piece delicately before answering. "My mother was a violinist and taught me. She said Villa-Lobos put the soul of Brazil into the notes." Her voice was firm, articulate, without the characteristic street accent. "Your name? Where do you live?" The questions came out abruptly, with the businessman's characteristic objectivity. "Lucy Day. I live with my grandmother in Springdale Heights, in the East End." She adjusted her ukulele. "I play so we can get medicine for Grandma. She has heart problems." The light turned green and impatient horns blared behind the Porsche. In an impulse he couldn't explain later, Augustus extended his hand through the window, offering some £100 notes. "Thank you, sir." Lucy accepted the money with dignity, without the common greed of someone living on the streets. "Do you like Villa-Lobos?" "He's my favorite composer," Augustus replied, feeling an inexplicable connection with that child. "What's the exact address of the settlement?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, then wrote it on a piece of paper she took from her school backpack. "Grandma and I live in Block C, apartment 304. It's not really an apartment, but we keep it clean." The horns intensified. Augustus took the paper, put it in his jacket pocket, and accelerated the car. In the rearview mirror, he saw Lucy's small figure returning to the sidewalk, the ukulele on her back like a disproportionate backpack. That night, in the penthouse triplex in Mayfair, Augustus dined alone as he had for decades. The rosewood table seated 12, but it had always been occupied only by him. The private chef had prepared salmon with passion fruit sauce, accompanied by organic vegetables, a diet recommended by the nutritionist for longevity. Augustus smiled ironically at the recommendation. After dinner, instead of reviewing contracts or analyzing spreadsheets as usual, the businessman opened a bottle of reserve red wine and put on the complete version of the Brazilian Baquianas. He went to the balcony, which offered a panoramic view of the illuminated city. Somewhere in that sea of lights was a girl playing Villa-Lobos on an old ukulele. The decision came with the same clarity with which he closed deals. The next day at 10 a.m., the Porsche Cayenne parked in front of Springdale Heights, an old commercial building abandoned for years and now inhabited by hundreds of homeless families. Chapter 2. Two Worlds Collide. Springdale Heights was not on the official maps of London. It was one of those invisible places for those who only circulated between the affluent neighborhoods and financial centers. An old commercial building from the 70s, abandoned after successive bankruptcies, now housed over 200 families who transformed offices into makeshift homes. Augustus observed the building with analytical eyes. The property, ironically, had belonged to a former competitor who hadn't survived the crisis of the 90s. As a developer, Augustus automatically calculated well-located land, potential for retrofit, guaranteed appreciation after the family's removal. Thoughts he soon abandoned, ashamed of his own coldness. Rosalie, his personal assistant for 2 decades, remained in the passenger seat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Taylor, are you sure you want to go in personally? I can send someone from the foundation to check on the girl's situation." Augustus adjusted the platinum watch on his wrist. "You know me well enough to know I don't delegate what I can do personally, Rosalie." Carrying a premium food basket, hastily assembled by his private chef, and a box of medicines, Augustus headed to the building's entrance. Some residents watched him with curiosity and suspicion. A man in an Italian suit and handmade shoes was not a common visitor to that address. The interior of the building revealed the ingenuity of necessity. Corridors were transformed into small makeshift markets. Old office partitions became walls of new homes. Exposed wiring formed a complex web that brought electricity to every corner. A chaotic but functional organization. A black woman with impeccably braided gray hair approached with authority. "Are you looking for someone?" Her voice was firm, without subservience. "Mrs. Sylvia Day, apartment 304, Block C." Augustus replied, maintaining the neutral tone he used in negotiations. The woman scrutinized him with astute eyes. "I'm June, the coordinator of the settlement." "Mrs. Sylvia is bedridden. What do you want with her?" "I met your granddaughter yesterday, Lucy." Augustus showed the basket and medicines. "I came to offer help." June narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "Help doesn't usually come from men like you without a price, with all due respect. There's always a first time." Augustus allowed himself a faint smile, something rare. June hesitated, then nodded. "Block C is on the 3rd floor. Watch out for the 5th step on the 2nd staircase, it's loose." The walk to apartment 304 was a journey through a reality Augustus only knew through socio-economic reports. Children played in narrow corridors. Women chatted while hanging clothes on makeshift lines. Elderly people played dominoes at communal tables. There was precariousness, but also a vitality that was missing from the luxury condominiums where he lived. The door to 304, actually an old office partition adapted, was ajar. From inside came the gentle sound of the ukulele. Augustus knocked lightly. Lucy appeared, still in her school uniform. Her eyes widened as she recognized the visitor. "You really came," she exclaimed with genuine surprise. "I said I would." Augustus replied as if keeping promises was the most natural thing in the world, though he knew how many he had broken throughout his business life. The internal space was tiny, but meticulously organized. A single room served as living room, bedroom, and kitchen. Dark curtains separated what must have been the makeshift bathroom. The walls were decorated with hand-drawn musical scores and magazine clippings about classical music. On a simple bed in the corner of the room, an elderly woman rested with her eyes closed. The resemblance to Lucy was evident, despite the deep wrinkles and tired demeanor. Beside the bed, a small table displayed medicine bottles, some empty. "Grandma, we have a visitor." Lucy approached gently. "It's the gentleman from the Porsche who likes Villa Lobos." Mrs. Sylvia slowly opened her eyes. Despite her apparent physical fragility, her gaze was sharp, assessing. "Good afternoon, sir." "Augustus Taylor." He introduced himself, placing the basket and medicines on a makeshift table. "The famous Augustus Taylor?" Mrs. Sylvia asked, raising herself slightly. "The owner of Taylor Developments?" "The very one," Augustus confirmed, surprised by the recognition. "I worked as an executive secretary at Mendez Construction for 32 years before the stroke," she explained with dignity. "I recognize the important names in the sector. What brings you to our humble home?" Augustus hesitated, realizing that even he didn't know how to answer that question precisely. "Your granddaughter played a song that means a lot to me. I was impressed with her talent." Lucy smiled shyly, hugging the ukulele. "My daughter was a violinist with the London Symphony Orchestra," Mrs. Sylvia explained, pointing to a framed photograph on the wall. "Carmen studied at the conservatory on a scholarship. Lucy inherited her talent." The photo showed a young woman in concert attire, holding a violin and smiling at the camera. Augustus noticed the absence of mention of the girl's father, but didn't ask. "Where is your mother now, Lucy?" A heavy silence settled in the small space. Mrs. Sylvia closed her eyes for a moment. "Mom passed away 2 years ago," Lucy replied with the direct simplicity of children. "Accident on the M25 motorway. Since then, it's just me and Grandma." "I'm sorry," Augustus murmured, uncomfortable with his own inadequacy in the face of another's pain. "We try to move forward." Mrs. Sylvia resumed speaking, with that peculiar strength of those who have already faced the worst. "Lucy goes to public school in the morning. In the afternoon, she studies alone with the books we manage to get, and she practices music whenever she can." "We don't have Mum's violin anymore," Lucy explained, caressing the worn ukulele. "We had to sell it to pay for the hospital when Grandma got sick, but Mr. Chapman from the instrument store gave me this used ukulele, and I adapted the scores." Augustus observed the girl with growing admiration. At 8 years old, she showed a resilience and discipline he had rarely found in executives trained at the best universities. "Do you receive any aid, a pension?" he asked, already thinking of possibilities. "I have a small retirement pension," Mrs. Sylvia replied. "But the heart medicines consume almost everything. Lucy's performances at the traffic lights supplement our income." Lucy, sensing the tension, picked up the ukulele. "Would you like to hear another song, Mr. Taylor? I learned Watercolor of Brazil last week." Without waiting for a reply, she began to play, transforming the small improvised piece with the same magic she had demonstrated at the traffic light. Her small fingers extracted a surprising richness of nuance from the modest instrument. Augustus closed his eyes for a moment, transported. When he was a child, before ambitions and empire, he had dreamed of being a pianist. His father, a rigid old-school businessman, had cut that dream short. "Music doesn't fill your stomach, boy." Decades later, that unknown child played something dormant within him. "Do you have music lessons, Lucy?" "We can't afford it, Mr. Taylor," Mrs. Sylvia replied with regret. "But teacher Deborah from the school lends her music theory books, and Lucy watches videos at the public library when we manage to go there." "Would you like to have formal lessons?" Augustus asked the girl directly. Lucy's eyes sparkled. "More than anything in the world. I want to be an orchestra conductor one day like Maestro Isaac Sterling." She pronounced the name carefully, clearly an idol. "I've already memorized how conductors move the baton for each musical beat." Augustus stood up, seized by a sudden decision. "Mrs. Sylvia, I would like to visit you regularly, and if you'll allow me, help Lucy with her musical education." The old woman studied him for a long time before answering. "Why, Mr. Taylor? We are complete strangers." Augustus could have given many answers: philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, even the boredom of a rich man. But surprising himself, he opted for the truth. Because your granddaughter reminded me that there is beauty beyond profit and acquisitions, and because I have little time left to discover what truly matters. Mrs. Sylvia seemed to understand what was left unsaid. She nodded slowly. Then, welcome to our home, Mr. Taylor. You can visit us whenever you wish. But bear in mind that Lucy is all I have left in the world, and that we are poor but we have dignity. I understand and respect that, Augustus replied, feeling strangely relieved to be in that simple place, so far from the aseptic environments he frequented. Before leaving, he promised to return in 2 days. On the way back to the car, where Rosalie awaited him anxiously, Augustus was already planning his next steps. He would need to activate his network of contacts in London's classical music world, and more importantly, he would need to reorganize his schedule to include something he had never had: time for someone other than himself. Chapter 3. New Scores. The following weeks established an unexpected routine in Augustus Taylor's methodical life. 3 times a week, the Porsche parked in front of Springdale Heights. The residents, initially suspicious, now recognized him and waved as he passed through the makeshift corridors. Some even joked, calling him the conductor's godfather. That Tuesday in June, Augustus arrived earlier than usual. Under his arm, he carried a rectangular case wrapped in colorful gift paper. Rosalie, who continued to accompany him on his visits, carried bags with provisions specially selected for Mrs. Sylvia's diet. "Good morning, Mr. Taylor. Lucy has already left for school," informed June, the settlement coordinator, who was watering small plants arranged in makeshift pots in the central corridor. "Actually, today I came especially to talk with Mrs. Sylvia," Augustus replied, checking his watch. "I have a proposal to make." Upon arriving at apartment 304, he found the door open. Mrs. Sylvia was sitting in a makeshift wheelchair, trying to reach some books on a high shelf. "Mrs. Sylvia, let me help you," Augustus offered, hurrying to reach the books for her. "Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Age and my heart no longer allow me these adventures," she smiled, adjusting the shawl on her shoulders. "Lucy insists on keeping the books organized by subject, but she puts the classical music ones on the highest shelf." Augustus noticed that her breathing seemed more labored than usual. The deep dark circles under her eyes and slightly bluish lips indicated a worsening of her health. "Are you feeling well today?" "Better days will come," Mrs. Sylvia replied with that characteristic dignity. "The health clinic doctor adjusted my medicines, but some side effects are inevitable." Augustus sat in the chair opposite her, placing the wrapped package on the small table. "Mrs. Sylvia, in recent weeks I have met your granddaughter and witnessed her extraordinary talent. I brought something for her." He unwrapped the package, revealing a new small violin suitable for a child's hands. The instrument gleamed with the characteristic shine of newly varnished noble wood. "It's beautiful," Mrs. Sylvia murmured, running her fingers delicately over the instrument. "It looks like the one that belonged to my daughter. It was made by the same luthier who built the London Symphony Orchestra's violin," Augustus explained. "But that's not all I came to offer." He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to the old woman. "What is this?" "A place for Lucy at the Royal Academy of Music, with a full scholarship. I spoke personally with the director, Dr. Cecilia Blackwood. She agreed to evaluate Lucy and, after hearing some recordings I made with my phone, guaranteed her place." Mrs. Sylvia held the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes moist. "Why, Mr. Taylor? Why are you doing all this for us?" Augustus hesitated. How to explain what even he didn't fully understand? How to say that, after decades pursuing profit and power, he had found a more significant purpose by hearing a girl playing Villa Lobos at a traffic light. "Let's say I'm making up for decades of missed opportunities," he finally replied. "Seeing Lucy play, I remembered the boy I once was before the business world swallowed me whole." Mrs. Sylvia studied him with those eyes that seemed to see beyond words. "You're not well, are you?" The question caught Augustus by surprise. He hadn't told anyone about his diagnosis, except his doctor and lawyer. "How did you know?" "I recognize the signs. This urgency to do something meaningful. That look of someone who counts time differently." She sighed. "My daughter had the same look in the last few weeks before the accident, as if she sensed she needed to make the most of every moment." Augustus neither confirmed nor denied. He just nodded slightly. "I accept your help for Lucy, Mr. Taylor. Not for me, but for her, and because I believe you need her as much as she needs you." At that moment, a violent coughing fit shook Mrs. Sylvia's fragile body. She put her hand to her chest, her face contorted in pain. Augustus stood up alarmed, holding her by the shoulders. "I need to call an ambulance." "It's not necessary," she tried to argue, but the words came out broken by her difficult breathing. "I'm used to these crises." Augustus already had his cell phone in hand, ignoring her protests. "Rosalie, call my private doctor. Tell him it's an emergency, and ask the driver to prepare the car right now." In the following minutes, Augustus acted with the same decisiveness and efficiency that had made him a feared magnate in the corporate world. Ignoring protocols and using his influence, he ensured Mrs. Sylvia was admitted immediately to St. Thomas's Hospital, one of London's most prestigious. While the medical team performed the initial examinations, Augustus realized he needed to pick up Lucy from school. The girl couldn't return to an empty apartment, not knowing where her grandmother was. Driving personally for the first time in years, Augustus arrived at Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt Primary School at the exact time of dismissal. Uniformed children poured through the gates like a small, undisciplined army. Amidst the confusion, he spotted Lucy's characteristic curls as she walked alone, her ukulele slung across her back. "Lucy!" The girl turned, surprised to recognize Augustus. "Mr. Taylor, what are you doing here?" she asked, approaching the car. "Your grandmother had a slight indisposition," he explained, choosing his words carefully. "She's at the hospital, receiving the best care. I came to pick you up, to accompany me there." Lucy's face paled. "Will Grandma be okay?" "We'll do everything in our power," Augustus replied, helping her into the car. On the way to the hospital, Lucy remained silent, her restless fingers plucking imaginary ukulele strings. Augustus respected that moment, understanding that despite her young age, she already knew too much about the meaning of loss. At St. Thomas's, Mrs. Sylvia had been transferred to the cardiac ICU. Dr. Mansfield, a renowned cardiologist, awaited Augustus in the private lounge. "Mr. Taylor, the situation is delicate. Mrs. Sylvia suffered a severe cardiac decompensation. Her mitral valve is severely compromised, and there are signs of advanced congestive heart failure." "What are the options?" Augustus asked, keeping Lucy close. "She needs surgery for valve replacement. Without it—" The doctor paused significantly, looking at the child. "I understand," Augustus interrupted. "Prepare everything necessary. Cost is not an issue. The surgery carries considerable risks given the patient's general condition," the doctor warned. "I want to see my grandma," Lucy intervened in a small but determined voice. Dr. Mansfield hesitated, looking at Augustus. "She can go in for 5 minutes, no more than that." While Lucy talked with her grandmother, Augustus faced a reality he had never considered. What would happen to the girl if Mrs. Sylvia didn't make it? There were no other relatives. The institutional foster care system would likely be her fate. In the following days, while Mrs. Sylvia prepared for surgery, Augustus made a decision that would completely change his life. After consulting his lawyer and activating contacts in social services, he obtained temporary authorization for Lucy to stay under his care during her grandmother's hospitalization. The night before Mrs. Sylvia's surgery, Lucy arrived at the penthouse triplex in Mayfair. The girl's eyes widened as she contemplated the luxurious space, larger than the entire settlement where she lived. "Your house is like a palace, Mr. Augustus," she commented, admiring the contemporary art paintings and designer furniture. "It's too big for one person," Augustus replied, guiding her through the apartment to the guest room that had been hastily adapted to receive her. The impersonal decor of the room contrasted with the colorful chaos of the small apartment in the settlement. Feeling the inadequacy, Augustus improvised. "Tomorrow we can decorate the room however you prefer." Lucy placed her small backpack with her belongings on the king-size bed. "Can I practice my ukulele here?" "Of course," Augustus replied, relieved by the simple question. "Actually, I have something to show you." He led Lucy to the living room. In the center of the room, a Steinway & Sons grand piano gleamed under strategic lighting. "It was mine when I was young," he explained. "It was stored for decades. I had it restored when I started visiting you." Lucy's eyes sparkled. She approached the instrument shyly, touching the keys with reverence. "May I?" "All yours." Lucy sat at the piano, adjusting her posture as if she had done it her entire life. She began to play a simple, experimental melody, discovering the instrument. Gradually, the melody took shape, and Augustus recognized Little Country Train again. "I've never played piano before," she explained, without stopping playing. "But Mom used to say that music is like learning several languages from the same family. When you know one instrument, it's easier to understand the others." Augustus watched that child prodigy, feeling an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just admiration for innate talent. It was something deeper, a renewed sense of purpose. That night, for the first time in decades, the penthouse triplex in Mayfair filled with music. And also for the first time, Augustus did not dine alone at the rosewood table. They improvised a picnic in the living room, while Lucy told stories about her violinist mother, and Augustus, surprising himself, shared memories of his childhood in the Yorkshire Dales. Between one story and another, between a song and a comfortable silence, something began to form. It wasn't yet a family, it was too early for that, but it was certainly the beginning of something significant. When Lucy finally fell asleep in the guest room, Augustus remained in the living room, contemplating the open piano and the scattered scores. For a brief moment, he forgot about the terminal diagnosis, the unfinished business, the time that was slipping away. There was only the music and the silent promise he had made to that extraordinary child. No matter what happened, he would ensure her talent flourished. The next day, as Mrs. Sylvia entered the operating room, Augustus and Lucy waited in the reserved area. The girl held the businessman's hand tightly, as if that contact was her only anchor in a sea of uncertainties. "If the worst happens," she whispered, with a maturity disproportionate to her age, "I promise I won't give up on music. Grandma and Mom would be proud." Augustus gently squeezed the small hand in his. "No thinking about the worst, little conductor. We're going to compose a more beautiful melody for this story together." Chapter 4. Chords of Transformation. Mrs. Sylvia's surgery lasted 7 hours. In the aseptic corridor of St. Thomas's, Augustus alternated between unavoidable business calls and moments of silent contemplation. Lucy, in turn, spent her time drawing imaginary musical scores in a notebook the businessman had given her. When Dr. Mansfield finally appeared in the corridor, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "We managed to replace the mitral valve, Mr. Taylor. It was a difficult surgery, but Mrs. Sylvia showed admirable resilience." "Will she recover?" Lucy asked, clutching the sleeve of the doctor's white coat. The cardiologist knelt to be at the girl's height. "Your grandmother is very strong, Lucy, but recovery will be slow and will require special care for several months. She will need a controlled environment, without exertion, with constant monitoring." The reality of the situation weighed on Augustus. The controlled environment the doctor mentioned was obviously incompatible with the precariousness of Springdale Heights. The steep stairs, the humidity, the lack of basic resources, everything would conspire against Mrs. Sylvia's recovery. "How long until she can return home?" Augustus asked. "At least 3 months of strict follow-up after hospital discharge, which will not occur before 2 weeks if all goes well." That night, after leaving Lucy sleeping in the penthouse under the care of Martha, the housekeeper he had specially hired for the girl's arrival, Augustus met with Raphael Nolan, his personal lawyer for over 2 decades. "Are you sure about this, Augustus?" Raphael asked, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the documents on the black marble table. "It's an extremely serious decision." "I've never been so sure of something in my entire life," Augustus replied, pouring himself a finger of whiskey. "Time is running out, Raphael. I need to ensure everything is in order." The lawyer sighed, mixing professional concern with the friendship built over the years. "The adoption process is complex and lengthy. Even with all your influence, it would take months, perhaps years." "I don't have years," Augustus replied dryly, taking a sip of whiskey. "There's the possibility of temporary guardianship while the adoption process is underway," Raphael suggested. "Given the exceptional context, Mrs. Sylvia hospitalized, no other relatives, you already acting as temporary guardian, we could get that more quickly. Make it happen. Use all necessary resources." "And what about the foundation? Do you want me to expedite that process simultaneously?" Augustus nodded, approaching the window that offered a panoramic view of illuminated London. The Augustus Taylor Cultural Foundation should be legally established by the end of the month. I want it structured to operate autonomously after my departure. Augustus, Raphael hesitated, you should consider experimental treatments. There are clinics in the United States, in Germany. We've discussed this, Augustus cut him off. I prefer to use the time I have left building something significant than chasing false hopes in waiting rooms around the world. In the following weeks, while Mrs. Sylvia gradually recovered in the hospital, life in the Mayfair penthouse found a new rhythm. Lucy was enrolled at Westminster School, one of London's most prestigious educational institutions, with a special program that accommodated her classes at the Royal Academy of Music. Every morning, the driver took the girl to school. In the afternoons, depending on the day, she had music theory classes, violin practice, or simply studied in the penthouse library, which Augustus had adapted to include children's and young adult books. In the evenings, the two dined together, a routine the businessman had never imagined, but which he now awaited with growing anticipation. How was school today? Augustus asked that specific night, as they enjoyed a shrimp risotto prepared by the private chef. Lucy poked at the rice with her fork, hesitant. Different how? The children there have everything. Expensive cell phones, designer clothes. They talk about trips to Disneyland and beach houses in Brighton. She looked at Augustus with questioning eyes. One girl asked where my summer residence was. I didn't know what to say. Augustus felt a pang of guilt. He had enrolled Lucy in an elite school without considering the cultural shock she would face. Do you miss your old school? I miss my friends. Teacher Deborah, not feeling different. Do you want to go back? Lucy reflected for a moment, the maturity beyond her years always present in her eyes. No. The music classes at Westminster are wonderful. We have real instruments, not just plastic flutes, and Teacher Isabel says I can join the youth orchestra if I keep working hard. So what's the problem? I don't know who I am now, Mr. Augustus. I'm not like the rich kids, but I'm not the girl who played at the traffic lights anymore. She put down her fork, her eyes watering. And I miss Grandma, the settlement, even the sound of the drips when it rained heavily. Augustus reached across the table, gently touching the girl's arm. You are Lucy Day, an extraordinary musician, and you are just beginning a new phase of your life, without leaving behind who you were or where you came from. The girl smiled shyly, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. Do you think Grandma will like living here too? Augustus nodded, feeling a wave of relief that she was already assimilating the new reality. We'll prepare a special room for her, with all the necessary medical equipment and a view of the park that she'll love. That same week, Augustus faced another medical appointment. The results were not encouraging. The tumor had grown, despite palliative chemotherapy. Dr. Alistair, chief oncologist at Guy's Hospital, adjusted his glasses as he explained the situation. We have some options for pain control, Mr. Taylor, but we need to be realistic about the prognosis. How much time? Augustus asked directly. The doctor hesitated, briefly looking away. Weeks, Mr. Taylor. Perhaps a month, if we're lucky. After that... Augustus raised his hand, interrupting the doctor. I understand. Prescribe whatever is necessary for me to maintain functionality as much as possible. I have important projects to complete. Upon leaving the office, Augustus found Rosalie waiting in the corridor. Is everything all right, Mr. Taylor? No, Rosalie, but we'll do our best with the time we have. He checked his watch. I have a meeting with the foundation team in an hour, and I need to stop by the jeweler first. At Tiffany & Co. on Bond Street, Augustus personally chose a delicate gold chain with a treble clef pendant, studded with small diamonds. It was a gift to celebrate Lucy's first month at the Royal Academy of Music, where she was already excelling as an exemplary student. That night, after giving the gift to the girl, who reacted with a mixture of disbelief and joy, Augustus surprised her with more news. Lucy, I would like you to accompany me tomorrow to an important engagement. Is it a business meeting? She asked, curious as she admired the pendant in the mirror. In a way, we are going to inaugurate something that, I hope, will be a positive legacy for many children like you. The next day, Lucy, wearing a formal outfit Martha had helped her choose, accompanied Augustus to a spacious mansion in Notting Hill. The historic building, recently restored, displayed an imposing neoclassical facade. A group of people was already waiting at the entrance, including journalists and photographers. What is this place? Lucy asked, impressed. The headquarters of the Augustus Taylor Cultural Foundation, he replied, guiding her by the hand, a space dedicated to the musical education of young talents from underprivileged communities. Inside the mansion, a modern auditorium had been built, preserving original architectural elements, rehearsal rooms equipped with top-notch instruments, recording studios, a complete music library, a true temple dedicated to art. During the inauguration ceremony, Augustus gave a brief speech, something unusual for the normally reserved businessman. This foundation is born from the recognition that true value lies not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the legacy we leave behind, in the music that continues to resonate even after the last chord. To everyone's surprise, he invited Lucy to the stage. The girl, initially hesitant, took her place in front of the violin that Augustus had strategically placed on a pedestal. This is Lucy Day, the inspiration for this project, a young woman who taught me more about resilience and purpose in a few weeks than I learned in decades on corporate boards. Lucy, overcoming her initial nervousness, performed White Wing by Luis Gonzaga in an adaptation for solo violin. The interpretation, technically impressive for someone so young and emotionally charged, drew enthusiastic applause from the audience. Backstage after the performance, a reporter approached Augustus. "Mr. Taylor, there are rumors that you are in the process of adopting the young violinist. Can you confirm?" Augustus looked at Lucy, who was chatting animatedly with some invited musicians. "We are building an unconventional family," he replied diplomatically. "The rest, with all due respect, belongs to our private sphere." That same night after the event, Augustus, Lucy, and Raphael met in the penthouse office. The lawyer brought news about the guardianship process. "We obtained temporary guardianship, Augustus." The children's court judge was moved by the situation, especially after watching a recording of Lucy's performance at the Royal Academy of Music. Augustus felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. "And what about the definitive adoption?" "It's underway. With Mrs. Sylvia's express consent and no other relatives claiming, we have good chances, but we need to be patient." Lucy, who had been observing the conversation in silence until then, spoke up. "Does this mean I can call Mr. Augustus Dad?" The question, in its childlike simplicity, hit Augustus like an unexpected wave of emotion. Dad. A word he had never imagined associated with himself. "Only if you want to, Lucy," he replied, his voice slightly choked. "There's no pressure." "Yes, I want to," she smiled, revealing the gap left by a recently lost baby tooth. "I can start now. Dad?" That word, pronounced for the first time, sealed a transformation that had been silently occurring within Augustus. The man who had built an empire based on cold calculation and relentless ambition now found his highest purpose in late fatherhood. Later that night, after putting Lucy to bed, a ritual that had become sacred, complete with stories and a brief musical session, Augustus returned to his office. With Raphael's help, he finalized his will. The greater part of his fortune would be allocated to a trust fund for Lucy, with specific clauses regarding education, musical training, and the maintenance of the foundation. "Are you sure about this, Augustus?" Raphael questioned, seeing the extent of the planned donations. "You're practically leaving everything to the foundation and to Lucy." "And to whom else would I leave it?" Augustus replied, signing the document with the fountain pen his own father had given him when he started in business. "Lucy will not only inherit my fortune, Raphael, she will inherit the responsibility of transforming it into something meaningful." When Raphael left, Augustus remained in the office, contemplating the newly framed photograph on his desk. Him and Lucy at the foundation's inauguration, the girl holding the violin, both genuinely smiling at the camera. It was a beginning, a new chord in a symphony that he hoped would continue long beyond his own existence. Chapter 5. Final Crescendo. The beginning of spring finally brought Mrs. Sylvia to the Mayfair penthouse. After almost 3 months of hospitalization and recovery, the elderly woman was greeted with a small celebration organized by Lucy, who had transformed the living room into a makeshift garden with flowers of every possible color. "Welcome to your new home, Grandma," the girl exclaimed, carefully guiding her grandmother's wheelchair through the spacious area. Mrs. Sylvia, visibly moved, observed the environment with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. For someone who had lived her entire life simply, the opulence of the penthouse was almost intimidating. "It's very kind, Mr. Augustus, but you didn't need to do all this," she commented, when they arrived at the specially adapted room for her, with medical equipment discreetly integrated into the elegant decor. "You deserve every comfort, Mrs. Sylvia," Augustus replied, who in recent months had learned to value much more than just financial results. "Besides, having you here means a lot to Lucy, and to me too." Mrs. Sylvia's adaptation to the new reality was gradual, but surprisingly smooth. The elderly woman's natural dignity and her wisdom, forged over decades of hardship, quickly won the respect of everyone in the house, from Martha, the initially reserved housekeeper, to Dr. Sampson, the nurse specially hired for her daily care. In the following weeks, a routine was established that completely transformed the previously solitary atmosphere of the penthouse. In the mornings, while Lucy was at school, Mrs. Sylvia occupied herself with embroidery or reading the classics she had always wanted to know, now available in the expanded library. In the afternoons, she often participated in her granddaughter's musical study sessions, offering precise observations that revealed her deep knowledge of music, inherited from years of accompanying her violinist daughter's career. For Augustus, that family coexistence, something he had never experienced, proved to be a daily discovery. Meals, once functional events for body maintenance, became moments of genuine connection. The simple conversations, the small disagreements, the shared laughter, everything he had always considered trivial, now proved essential. On a particularly sunny October afternoon, while Mrs. Sylvia rested and Lucy practiced in the acoustically isolated studio Augustus had built, the businessman faced another medical appointment. This time, Dr. Alistair came to the penthouse, a deference to his patient's increasingly debilitated state. "The medications are no longer controlling the pain as they should," the oncologist observed, after a thorough examination. "We need to adjust the protocol." "And what about the time?" Augustus asked directly, as he always did. The doctor hesitated, briefly looking away. "Weeks, Mr. Taylor. Perhaps a month, if we're lucky." Augustus nodded, receiving the information with the same composure with which he usually received unfavorable financial reports. "Thank you for your honesty, Doctor. I need to organize some final matters." When the doctor left, Augustus went to his office and called Raphael. "We need to speed everything up," he said without preamble. "The adoption, the transition in the company, the final structuring of the foundation." "Augustus," Raphael's voice sounded worried, "we can't rush the judiciary beyond what we've already done. The adoption process is proceeding with maximum priority. But still, make the impossible happen, Raphael. Use my fortune for good for the first time. Hire the best specialists. Move whoever needs to be moved. Lucy needs to be legally protected." In the following days, despite increasing fatigue and intensifying pain, Augustus remained active. He met with his executive team to finalize the transition of command in the companies. He personally visited the foundation to supervise the implementation of educational programs. And above all, he dedicated every possible moment to Lucy. One special evening, he invited the girl to a private concert in the music room. Lucy, now wearing a formal sapphire blue dress, specially chosen for the occasion, found Augustus sitting at the piano. "I didn't know you played, Dad," she commented, surprised. "I used to play, many decades ago," Augustus smiled. "I was never particularly talented, but I knew enough to express myself through the keys." With fingers that slowly rediscovered their way, he began to perform a simple piece by Chopin. The notes came out hesitantly at first, gradually gaining confidence. It wasn't a perfect performance, far from it, but it carried a genuine emotion that transcended technique. Lucy watched, fascinated, this new side of her adoptive father. When he finished, she applauded enthusiastically. It was beautiful. "Now it's your turn," Augustus invited, getting up from the bench. "But first, I have something to show you." He went to a built-in cabinet in the wall and took out an old box. Inside, carefully preserved, were dozens of time-yellowed musical scores. "These were my compositions," he explained, handing some sheets to Lucy. "I never showed them to anyone, not even my parents." Lucy examined the scores with the respect of someone who understood their value. "Can I play them?" "That's exactly what I hope you do." In the following hours, the room filled with melodies that had remained silent for more than half a century. Lucy, with her natural talent, brought Augustus's abandoned musical dreams to life. At times she improvised, adding her own interpretations. At others, She asked her adoptive father to explain the intention behind certain passages. "This music," Augustus said, pointing to a specific score, "I composed when I was approximately your age. It was called New Horizon." "It's about hope," Lucy commented after playing the first few measures. "Exactly," Augustus smiled, impressed by her intuition. "How did you know?" "The melody ascends, like someone looking up. The notes have space between them, as if they're breathing freely." She continued playing, completely immersed in the piece. "It's beautiful to think that you, even as a boy, already composed something so profound." When they finished that special musical session, it was already past midnight. Lucy, exhausted but radiant, hugged Augustus before retiring to her room. "Thank you for sharing your music with me, Dad. It's the most precious gift I've ever received." After she left, Augustus remained in the room, surrounded by the scores of his youth. There was a strange sense of completeness, as if a circle begun decades ago was finally closing. The next morning, during breakfast, Augustus made an announcement that surprised both Lucy and Mrs. Sylvia. "I've reserved the Royal Albert Hall for next Sunday," he said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "Lucy will give a special performance." The girl almost choked on her orange juice. "The Royal Albert Hall? But only professional musicians perform there." "And you are an exceptional musician," Augustus replied naturally. "Besides, it will be a charity event for the foundation. I've invited some friends, business partners, influential personalities from the cultural scene." "What will I play?" Lucy asked, her voice betraying her nervousness. "My compositions, our compositions actually, since you've significantly improved them." Augustus smiled, seeing the girl's face alternate between terror and excitement. "Don't worry, they'll be in the front row." The days leading up to the concert were intense. Lucy dedicated herself obsessively to rehearsals, determined to honor Augustus's compositions. The businessman, in turn, despite his increasingly fragile health, personally supervised every detail of the event. The day before the performance, Raphael brought the news Augustus had been waiting for. "We did it, Augustus," the lawyer announced, handing him an official envelope. "The judge signed the adoption decree today. Lucy is officially your daughter before the law." Augustus held the document with trembling hands. A single tear, something extremely rare for the always controlled businessman, slid down his face. "Thank you, Raphael, for everything." That night, Augustus gathered Lucy and Mrs. Sylvia in the library. With the formality of someone conducting an important meeting, he presented the official documents. "As of today, you are Lucy Day Taylor," he told the girl. "My daughter, not only in heart, but also before the law." Lucy threw herself into his arms, speechless with emotion. Mrs. Sylvia, observing the scene, had tears in her eyes. "There's one more thing," Augustus continued when spirits calmed. He handed Lucy an elegant folder. "This is my will. Normally it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss such matters with someone your age, but our situation is not conventional." Lucy opened the folder carefully, trying to understand the complex legal terms. "Does this mean all this will be mine?" she asked, impressed by the numbers she saw. "It will be your responsibility," Augustus gently corrected. "Fortune is just a tool. The true legacy is what you will do with it." He explained in detail how the assets would be managed by a board of trustees until she turned 21, how a substantial part of the resources was destined for the maintenance and expansion of the foundation, how there were guarantees to ensure Mrs. Sylvia's well-being for the rest of her life. "It's a lot of responsibility," Lucy murmured, overwhelmed. "You are capable," Augustus affirmed, holding her hands. "Just as you conduct the notes on a score, you will know how to orchestrate this legacy." On the morning of the concert, the Royal Albert Hall in London shone brightly. The historic building, one of the city's most important cultural symbols, was completely packed. Personalities from the financial, cultural, and political worlds attended the invitation of the businessman who rarely involved himself in public events. Backstage, Lucy adjusted the sapphire blue dress specially designed for the occasion. Her hands trembled slightly as she tuned her violin. No longer a student instrument, but an authentic Guarnerius that Augustus had acquired from a European collector. "Nervous?" Augustus asked, who had come to check on her preparation. "A little," she admitted. "What if I forget the notes? What if I go off-key in the middle of a piece?" "Then you improvise," he smiled. "Music, like life, rarely follows the planned score exactly. The important thing is to maintain the essence, the feeling. When Lucy finally stepped onto the stage, a respectful silence enveloped the theatre. The 9-year-old girl, with professional posture, positioned herself in the center, the violin firmly resting on her shoulder. "Good evening." Her voice, amplified by the microphone, sounded surprisingly confident. "Tonight I have the honor of presenting original compositions by Augustus Taylor, my father. Music he created in his youth, and that remained hidden for decades, waiting for the right moment to be heard." With a nod to the accompanying pianist, she began the first piece, New Horizon. The notes flowed with the emotional purity that only a child could impart to them. The entire theatre seemed to breathe in unison with the ascending melody that spoke of hope and possibilities. In the front row, Augustus watched, his chest swelling with a pride he had never imagined feeling. Beside him, Mrs. Sylvia held his hand, a silent complicity uniting the businessman and the elderly woman who, in such improbable circumstances, had become family. When the last note echoed through the theatre, a moment of reverent silence followed. Then, like a wave, the audience erupted in applause. People stood, giving a standing ovation to that performance that transcended musical technique to touch something profoundly human. Lucy, tears in her eyes, bowed. Then, in an unscripted gesture, she pointed to Augustus in the audience, inviting him to join her on stage. With some difficulty, discreetly leaning on a cane he had started using in recent weeks, Augustus walked onto the stage. He embraced Lucy amidst the unending applause. "You did it, Dad," she whispered in his ear. "Your music was finally heard." "No, daughter," he replied, his voice choked. "You did it, and you will continue to do so long after I'm gone." That night, after the concert, while specialized critics were already commenting on the emergence of a new musical prodigy, Augustus, Lucy, and Mrs. Sylvia celebrated privately in the penthouse, not with champagne or luxurious gifts, but with a simple improvised music session in the living room. Augustus at the piano, Lucy alternating between violin and ukulele, and even Mrs. Sylvia contributing with her surprisingly in-tune voice in old Brazilian lullabies. It was a family formed by the most improbable circumstances. A billionaire businessman in the twilight of his life, a child prodigy born into poverty, an elderly woman who carried the wisdom of hardship. 3 generations united not by blood, but by something equally powerful, music and the genuine love they had built together. When they finally retired, Augustus remained a little longer in the room, contemplating the illuminated city through the large windows. The terminal diagnosis, which initially seemed like a cruel sentence, had transformed into the catalyst for the greatest discovery of his life: the capacity to love unconditionally and be loved in the same way. On his bedside table, there was a framed photograph of that night's concert, him and Lucy on stage bowing together to acknowledge the applause. Beside the photo, a small note written in Lucy's childlike but careful handwriting: "To my dad, who taught me that true wealth lies in the notes we play in people's hearts. With eternal love, your daughter Lucy." Augustus fell asleep with a smile on his lips, the melody of New Horizon softly echoing in his thoughts. Chapter 6. Unfinished Symphony. London, 10 years later. The Royal Albert Hall glowed under the lights of the London night. On the marquee, a poster announced, "Augustus Taylor Youth Symphony Orchestra, conductor Lucy Day Taylor." Queues formed on the marble staircases as music critics, high society personalities, and scholarship students from the Augustus Taylor Foundation, these with special tickets, awaited the start of the performance. Backstage, a 19-year-old woman adjusted her impeccable black suit in front of the mirror. Her curly hair, now longer, was elegantly styled in a bun. Around her neck, the discreet gold chain with the treble clef pendant. She had never abandoned it in a decade. "Nervous, little conductor?" asked Mrs. Sylvia, now with completely white hair, entering the preparation room leaning on an intricately carved wooden cane. "A little, Grandma." Lucy smiled at her grandmother's reflection in the mirror. "It's the first time we're conducting an original composition of mine, and the first time with the full orchestra since the expansion." Mrs. Sylvia approached, delicately adjusting the collar of her granddaughter's suit. "Your father would be immensely proud." The mention of Augustus still brought a mix of pain and gratitude. 10 years had passed since his departure, but his presence remained alive in every one of Lucy's achievements. in every project of the foundation, in every musical note that echoed through the previously solitary rooms. "I'm dedicating tonight's performance to him," Lucy said, picking up the baton that rested on the dressing table, the last gift she had received from Augustus. The Augustus Taylor Youth Symphony Orchestra was not just another musical ensemble in the city. It was the Foundation's most ambitious project, an ensemble composed entirely of young musicians from vulnerable communities, selected for their talent and trained through an intensive educational program. Some came from Springdale Heights itself, others from various London peripheries, some even from other counties, attracted by the unique opportunity. As she headed for the wings, Lucy greeted the musicians waiting. Young faces between 14 and 21 years old, all formally dressed, instruments in hand, their gazes mixing nervousness and excitement. For many, it was their first performance on the city's most prestigious stage. "Remember," she said, gathering them in a circle, as she did before every performance, "we are not just playing notes on a score, we are telling stories, our stories. Music is our universal language, our passport to transcend barriers." The young conductor looked at the musicians, teenagers who, without the foundation, might never have touched a professional instrument. She saw in their eyes the same sparkle that Augustus had identified in hers 10 years earlier, at a traffic light on Regent Street. "Ready to spread hope like notes that touch the heart?" It was a phrase she always repeated, the same words she had once said to Augustus during a simple dinner in the Mayfair penthouse. The signal sounded, indicating 5 minutes to curtain. Lucy took a deep breath and headed for her position. In the audience, besides Mrs. Sylvia in the front row, were Raphael, now president of the Foundation's Board of Trustees, Rosalie, who had continued working with Lucy after Augustus's passing, and hundreds of people who supported the project. When the conductor stepped onto the podium, the theatre erupted in applause. With an elegant gesture, Lucy thanked them and turned to the orchestra. A brief moment of silence, the baton suspended in the air, and then the initial movement that unleashed the first piece, Variations on Little Country Train, a tribute to Villa-Lobos reinvented with contemporary elements. The orchestra responded with impressive precision. Young people who just a few years ago barely knew musical notation now executed complex arrangements with confidence and sensitivity. The result was a unique fusion of traditional Brazilian classical music and new influences, reflecting Lucy's own trajectory. After the first block of the program, dedicated to reinterpretations of Brazilian composers, came the most anticipated moment of the night, the world premiere of Symphony of Encounters, Lucy Day Taylor's first complete symphonic composition. The young conductor briefly turned to the audience. "This work is dedicated to my father, Augustus Taylor. Each movement represents a stage of our journey together, brief in time but infinite in meaning. The first movement, Traffic Light, began with hesitant solo violin notes, gradually incorporating other instruments, symbolizing the casual encounter that changed 2 lives. The second, Transformation, presented a dialogue between piano and orchestra, representing mutual discoveries. The third, Legacy, built up as an ascending spiral of harmonies culminating in an open, unfinished ending, a symphony in continuous evolution, just like the work Lucy continued. When the last note resonated, a moment of reverent silence followed, the greatest compliment an audience can offer. Then, like a wave, the ovation began. People stood, applauding enthusiastically. Some critics, known for their rigor, seemed genuinely moved. Lucy bowed in gratitude, then gestured to the orchestra to also receive recognition. Finally, she pointed to the sky in a symbolic gesture that the audience immediately understood. Backstage, after the concert, while the young musicians celebrated their success, Lucy was approached by a reporter from the London Times. "Conductor Taylor, your trajectory is extraordinary. From Springdale Heights to leading one of the most promising youth orchestras in the country. What would you say to other children from vulnerable communities who dream of an artistic career?" Lucy reflected for a moment before answering. "I would say that talent exists everywhere, in settlements, in peripheries, in forgotten rural areas. What's missing are opportunities. That's why the Augustus Taylor Foundation exists, to build bridges where there were once walls." "And what about future plans?" "We have just acquired land in Springdale Heights. We are going to build a free conservatory on the exact spot where I grew up. The place where it all began will transform into a musical training center for hundreds of children." After the interviews, Lucy returned to the Mayfair penthouse, the same apartment Augustus had left her, and which she had kept virtually intact, only adapting some spaces to accommodate her new needs. The library had been expanded, the music studio modernized, but the essence remained the same. Mrs. Sylvia, who now occupied a room on the main floor to avoid stairs, had already retired to rest. Lucy went to the office that had belonged to Augustus and which now served as her composition space. On the desk rested the original ukulele, that same worn instrument she played at the traffic lights. She had had it restored, but preserving its original characteristics, the marks of time, the small scratches that told stories. Beside it, in a simple frame, was the last photograph taken with Augustus, both at the piano, him teaching her the chords of one of his old compositions. And next to it, the handwritten note he had left with his will, found only after his passing. "Lucy, my daughter, when you read this, I will have already departed for the next performance. Do not lament. Conductors know that the value of a symphony is not in its duration, but in its ability to touch the soul. Our story was brief, but complete. You taught me that true immortality is not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the melodies we leave in people's hearts. Continue to compose our music together. With eternal love, your father, Augustus." Lucy gently touched the note as she did every night. Then she picked up the ukulele and began to softly strum "Little Country Train," the same song she had played at that traffic light on Regent Street 10 years earlier. A slight noise at the door interrupted her moment of reflection. It was Martha, the housekeeper. "Excuse me, Miss Lucy. There's someone who insists on speaking with you despite the hour." "Who is it?" "A girl. She must be about 8 years old. She says she watched the concert and needs to speak with you personally. I tried to explain it's late, but she's persistent." Something in the description piqued Lucy's curiosity. "Ask her to come in." Moments later, a child with brown skin and short curly hair timidly entered the office. She wore simple but clean clothes and carried a visibly worn flute case. "Good evening," Lucy greeted gently. "What's your name?" "Marianne Silver." Her voice was almost a whisper. I saw you at the concert today. The shelter director got tickets for us." "Shelter?" "Yes, I live at Hope Haven Shelter in South London. Since my parents—" The girl hesitated. "I understand," Lucy replied, sparing her from explaining. "And what can I do for you, Marianne?" The girl opened the flute case with almost reverent care. "I wanted to show you this." The instrument was nothing special, a student transverse flute with marks of use and small dents, but Marianne's gaze as she held it told a different story. "I taught myself," she explained before Lucy could ask. "I found scores at the public library and watched videos when they let me use the shelter's computer." "Could you play something for me?" Lucy asked, feeling a strange connection with that child. Without hesitation, Marianne positioned the flute and began to play. The melody was Watercolor of Brazil, the same one Lucy had played for Augustus during his first visit to Springdale Heights. The execution was not technically perfect, but there was something in the interpretation, a soul, a natural sensitivity that transcended technique. When the girl finished, Lucy remained silent for a few moments, absorbing what she had just witnessed. "Where did you learn that music?" "I heard your orchestra playing in the park last month. I've been practicing in secret ever since." Lucy approached, crouching to be at the child's eye level. "Why did you come looking for me, Marianne?" "Because—" The girl hesitated, gathering courage. "Because I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to make music that makes people feel beautiful things, even when life is hard." Something in those words, in the determination of those eyes, in the resilience implicit in that posture, transported Lucy back to a similar moment, 10 years earlier. She recognized herself in that child, not just the musical talent, but the same hunger to transcend circumstances through art. "Do you have music lessons at the shelter?" Marianne shook her head negatively. "But Aunt Suzanne, one of the caregivers, lets me practice in the supply room when I finish my school chores." Lucy smiled, making an instant decision, guided by a certainty that came from the heart. "Marianne, would you like to participate in the Augustus Taylor Foundation's music education program?" The girl's eyes widened. "Could I?" "Not only can you, but you must. Talents like yours need to be nurtured." Lucy paused, feeling the weight of the moment. "In fact, I have a broader proposal for you." In the following months, Lucy navigated the complex bureaucratic processes of the institutional foster care system. With the help of Raphael and the Foundation's legal team, she initially obtained temporary guardianship of Marianne, with a view to definitive adoption. The girl, who initially only attended music classes, gradually became part of the daily life of the Mayfair penthouse. Mrs. Sylvia, now an honorary great-grandmother, enthusiastically took on the role of cultural mentor, sharing stories and traditions that connected 3 generations of women united not by blood, but by their love for music and for each other. On a particular afternoon, while Marianne practiced flute in the studio under Mrs. Sylvia's supervision, Lucy visited Highgate Cemetery, where Augustus had been buried according to his wish, in a simple, unostentatious grave. Sitting beside the discreet tombstone, Lucy played on the restored ukulele, the same music she had performed on the day they met. "Dad," she said softly, as if talking to him, "I found a girl. Talented, resilient, full of dreams bigger than her circumstances. She reminded me so much of myself and of you. I'm continuing our cycle." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees, as if nature responded. The Foundation has already impacted over 2,000 lives in 10 years. The new conservatory in Springdale Heights will be inaugurated next semester. "And now, Marianne," Lucy smiled, "it's as if the universe is closing a perfect circle." Before leaving, she placed a handwritten score on the tombstone, the sketch of a new composition titled Cycles, inspired by the continuity that was now being established. Back at the penthouse, she found Marianne and Mrs. Sylvia in the living room improvising a duet, flute and voice, of a northeastern folk song. "How was your outing?" Mrs. Sylvia asked, always intuitive. "Refreshing," Lucy replied, sitting at the piano to join the musical improvisation. "You know, Marianne, my father used to say that true immortality lies in the melodies we leave in people's hearts." "Your father was a wise man," the girl commented, adjusting the position of her flute. "He was, indeed." Lucy smiled, strumming the first chords of a new composition that was beginning to form in her mind. "And his wisdom lives on in every note we play, in every life we transform through music." As the London sun set beyond the panoramic windows, 3 generations of women united by destiny and music improvised together, creating not only harmonies, but a living legacy that would continue to echo far beyond those walls. Far beyond that moment. The cycle began at a traffic light on Regent Street, when a lonely businessman met a girl with a ukulele, continued its unfinished symphony, no longer in figures, but in chords, harmonies, and melodies that touched the hearts of thousands. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Augustus and Lucy has deeply touched your hearts. Just like the musical notes that transformed lives in this narrative, there are many other emotional stories waiting to be discovered in our special playlist. Click here to access it. If this journey through music and unconditional love resonated in your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share your emotions in the comments. Every day we bring unique stories that, like a beautiful symphony, explore the complexity and beauty of life. Until our next encounter, where new narrative melodies await you.